I was inspired by something that you said on the podcast with Megs regarding, we'll talk about that a little later, regarding your inner coworker. But I was interested to find that, much like many of the other people that I have spoken with and the people that I admire and respect and who have gone through this journey that we talk about, you started out in corporate America as an engineer and then left in 2020. So I would really love to hear, like, I'd love to hear a little bit about like what led up to that moment, and like, and what was the trigger that made you be like, you know what, I want to do something different.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I think by that point I'd started meditating. I'd been meditating for a couple years or so, probably. And so I was getting a little bit more in tune with myself, and my own feelings and desires was just kind of a natural byproduct of the meditation that I started to support me with my ADHD. So my goal was to focus, but all of a sudden I was getting to know myself better. I was embracing my feelings and those kinds of things. I moved right before the pandemic hit, or before we really acknowledged it in America. So my first day in my new office with the same company, they sent us all home at lunch to work from home. And I didn't even have a permanent place here in California. I moved here from Houston. So I decided to move in with my parents for what I thought would be like 2 weeks down in San Diego. They lived just a couple hours from where I was working. Living with my parents was a huge trigger in itself, you know?
I was going to say that, like, going back to the parents' house.
Yeah, it was brought up a lot of stuff and a lot of feelings. And I had to dig even deeper into my mindfulness practice and meditation, which also I had a ton of time to do it. So I was really diving into all this stuff, really tapping into these layers of my feelings and getting to know what I actually wanted for myself. Mm-hmm. And then the universe offered me a great opportunity, I think, because my company was going through a layoff process. So they said, hey, you need to decide if you want to be here. And if you don't, then you can raise your hand for that and we can pay you to leave. So I was like, okay, I'm already getting the sense that I'm not supposed to be doing this. Mm-hmm. And I think I've probably known this for a long time. Maybe as an environmentalist, I shouldn't be in the oil industry. There are all these layers of things that were just converging. But before, it was fine because I had all these separate parts of myself, you know, like I had the fun, playful side of me that didn't come to work. I had the environmentalist of me that showed up at work, but in a different way, you know. Yeah. And suddenly all these parts were able to come together. I was able to see myself as a full being. I was handed this amazing opportunity, and I just felt like I'd be stupid and crazy not to take it.
Were you scared?
I was a little bit scared leading up to the decision. I was a little bit scared. I hired a life coach to help me during that time and to really make sure that leaving was what I wanted to do. I had one really scary moment after I made the decision to go. I had knee surgery, right? I planned it so that my knee surgery would be before I left the company. And I just remember standing right over here in my living room with my whole leg bound up, not being able to walk or do anything. I had a couple more weeks of work left before I was going to go. They'd approved my layoff. And I was just thinking, what have I done? I'm going to be trapped in this apartment. I'm going to have nothing to do. Work was a big part of my life. And I actually really liked the job that I was leaving. It was also a big part of my identity. So it was,
That's tough. That is really tough when your job is part of your identity, because I know that feeling. And then you're like, who am I without my job?
Yeah. And I was like, what am I going to do with all this free time? I was scared of the free time. I was scared of my own mind and going crazy and getting bored. But from the moment that I signed out on that last day and turned in my laptop and my badge, I never was scared again. I never regretted it.
Yeah. Like, well, I mean, do you feel like that like you're, you know, because it sounds like the universe was giving you some signs, right? Like that, like, you know, it's like, this is okay. It's the direction to go in. Like, and then the years since, obviously you've been working and developing your skill set. I call it our woo skill set. But you've been developing that skill set to, you know, allow you to intuit better. Do you feel like the fear and the concerns all kind of melted away because like you were really doing what you felt like was right for you? Like that's what helped it? Or was it like, cause like, let's say for example, I won $1 million. Well, then I definitely wouldn't be scared again. And it's just cause I won $1 million. Or right? So like, where do you think that came from?
I think there was a whole combination there. I think that even if I had $1 million, I would have been scared of being bored. I think,
Yeah,
you
okay.
know,
Yeah.
so it
It
wouldn't
was
have
the
fixed
boredom
that.
part that you were worried about, not like making money or anything like that.
Not so much at that point, because I thought that I was just leaving my job. I was going to figure out what to do in a few months. I got a few months worth of severance.
Yeah.
I'd find a new career and go start pursuing that, and everything would be different. I thought I'd, find another engineering job or something like that.
Wow. Okay. I'm with you now. So at this point, you're leaving, but you were still thinking you were going to go in the engineering space. So what happened then that got you to be like, because like you now your legs healing, you're doing your thing, and then something happened, right, to make you go from I'm going to look for engineering jobs to like, that I'm going to go do something different. What was that? What happened there?
It was a whole spiritual journey wound up happening that led me to this path. So when I was working with that life coach, I didn't know 100% that I was going to continue in engineering, but I didn't know that I wouldn't. It seemed pretty likely that I'd just do a different kind of engineering. But through that, I realized, wow, I have no idea what I even like. I have no idea what I want to do. I just picked a path and thought I'd follow it forever. I thought I would retire with that company.
Don't we
So
all? Our age is especially like that because you get a job, you stay in it your whole life, and then you die.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what my dad did. So
Mhm.
of course I would do the same thing. But what I realized working with that coach and realizing that I didn't know what I wanted to do, I realized I needed to take time to figure that out first before I could even pick the career. And I started getting more in touch with my intuition. That was a big part of it. I just went to this week-long meetup.com series with a bunch of energy workers, healers. I was trained in Reiki, but I wasn't really practicing it. But I just wanted to learn how to connect with my guides,
Yeah.
whatever that meant. Like I'd heard of spirit guides. It didn't really resonate, but I wanted to learn about it. So I went to this space where they said they'd teach me this, started connecting with all these awesome healers, started trusting my intuition a little bit more and meeting with the people that it felt aligned to meet with. There was some confusion during this time too, because so much stuff coming to me and I didn't understand how to discern, is this for me or not?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to talk to like this Uber driver is telling me he has this opportunity for me to make millions of dollars without working much. Is this happening because I told the universe that I wanted this
Right.
opportunity, or is this a scam? Pretty sure it was a scam, but in the beginning, I didn't have that discernment. So it was pretty wild. But eventually, I started to really get in touch with myself. Finding some mentors who I trusted really helped with that. Just knowing that there was someone who I could go to and check on these things with. And when I opened myself up and I said, all right, cool. I know who I am. I know what I desire, but now like, show me like what's work am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
People started calling me more for their own coaching, not calling it that, but people were really seeking out my support with figuring out what they should do in their relationships and their careers and those kinds of things. And I was like, oh, yeah, this feels like exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. It was my favorite part of my engineering job was like mentoring people and helping them get their voices heard. So it all just suddenly was so clear that I was supposed to be supporting people in some sort of way. It took me a little bit longer and working with a business mentor to figure out, okay, life coaching is what I want to do.
That's so when I was trying to figure out for myself, like, what do I want to do? Because like I think that one of the things that happens, with us is that, or with people, especially if you're somebody who's like on the journey of like discovery and into and growth, right? Where suddenly opportunities start to appear everywhere. And I had a similar problem where it was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be following, what isn't, like, because I think that for many of us, we have a very scarcity mindset. I definitely grew up with a scarcity mindset. I didn't have like I felt like there was enough for everyone, but like I was positive there wasn't enough for me. So it
Right.
was just like a very selective scarcity mindset happening there. But like as I got older, I started to feel, you felt like any opportunity that came your way, you had to take it, because if you didn't take it, you were wasting it, right? Like this was like, this is for you. You got to do this. This is for you. You're good at this. You can make money doing this. And I feel like we got really, I think, especially for people like probably like 40 years old and older, maybe like 35 and older, where our parents are of a very different generation than if your parents are Gen Xers. Like it's a different sort of philosophy. But you almost get to the point, it sounds like you got to, where it's not just because you can do something you will. It was like, I can do 800 different things. Which one do I want to actually do? Like, which one? Now, is that hard for you to like, because like once you decided that that's what you were going to do, and like, did you feel a pang of like, I'm going to miss engineering, or like any sort of like, oh, I like, wistfulness for your past career?
Well, no, I got another gift where I got a call from a recruiter for a biofuels engineering job, similar to the job that I really loved, but in alternative energy.
I was going to say,
And
right up your alley.
yeah, right up my alley. So I started talking to this recruiter. She was describing the job. Again, it was similar to the one I used to enjoy. The further she got into that conversation, I was like feeling this physical response in my body. Like my shoulders were tensing up. I was getting smaller. And I had to politely cut her off and say, hey, like, I'm so sorry. But the more you're talking about this, the more I know this absolutely is not for me. I know some people I can connect you to, but I don't want to hear any more about this job. And that,
So
what to me was so enlightening.
that's amazing. So I'm curious, when you work with your clients, do you help them to figure out these things? So like if somebody comes to you and they're like struggling, and they don't know what their choice is, like for career or things like that, what do you advise them in terms of like listening to their body? Because like almost all of my audience is either they're on their own journey, but most of them have had this question about, should I leave where I'm at? Should I do something different? I want to do something different. What could I do? What kinds of things do you recommend to your clients as you're talking to them to help them get comfortable with this new space of like, oh, I might not be in this job for the rest of my life. I might be doing something different.
Well, one thing that helped me a lot that I think I've heard you mention before is human design. So I don't teach human design, but when I learned about my human design, I'm a manifesting generator. That was incredibly helpful. Yes. That was so helpful for me to start discerning all that stuff that was coming at me and like learning how my body responds to it. So as a manifesting generator like you, it's this gut response that we'll have pretty quickly. So just learning that for myself and learning where to look in my body for it was incredibly helpful. When I have manifesting generator clients, I can explain that to them pretty well. But when it's someone else, I'm not versed in human design. I just offer it as something that they may want to look into. And that's really helped. Like a client who has an emotional response. And so she was able to understand just through free tools online, gave her confirmation of this wave of emotion that she'll go through that guides her to what's right for her. And that gave her a ton of clarity.
Freaking love that, right? Because like that's what human design did for me too, was like it almost from, I got this booklet from Erin Claire Jones that basically was like a book that says, this is what you are, and then like explained everything, right? So in layman's terms. And as I looked at it, I learned so much about myself that like I'd always known was true anyway, but I was trying to fight it because I was like, that's not how good, smart, successful, whatever, how it's done, right? But then when you look at the human design and it's like, this is how you're built and this is how you can go with the flow, right? Suddenly it's so much freedom. Like I was like, holy shit, I don't feel bad about half the things I feel bad about before.
Yeah. It's so liberating. To hear someone explain to you, no, this is actually like, you were always going to be this way. This is how you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to fit in with those other people. It's like, oh, cool. Great. Thank you.
Well, speaking of fitting in with other people, again, earlier on, I actually said to Bara that when we were going to naturally go in the direction of the questions that I had to ask, and you literally just put me right where I wanted to be, which is I was curious because you mentioned that you don't want to, you don't belong with those other people, and in your some of your writing, you talked about how when you were little that you do your social things, you do your sleepovers and things, but that like you felt deep down inside that you didn't feel like they actually wanted you there. And I related so hard to that feeling, especially when you said, like, it might have been when one little girl actually told you that they didn't want you there. And I was like, oh my God, that happened to me too. And it was the worst. It's like, you never forget it. It's like, I just want to say, I want to hug little Bara and be like, oh, it's okay. So, I'm curious because that was what sort of inspired you to, part of what inspired you to start your coaching business. But I'm curious because so many of us from experiences like that develop, that inner mean person voice that then will carry with you throughout your life. And it is the voice of, I don't actually know who it's actually the voice of, but it's an amalgamation of so many other people, things, bad things you've heard, and so on and so forth. And so I'm curious to know, how did you, as you were going through your journey, how did you navigate that space of with getting to know yourself? Is because, like, sitting alone with yourself for a while and meditating is a long time to be with that voice. So I'm really curious to know, like, how did you navigate that relationship to begin having a healthier one?
I think that when I started out, one of the big meditation techniques that I'd use is RAIN Tara Brach didn't invent it, but she teaches this RAIN method, which is, have you heard of it?
I'm not.
Okay. So it's an acronym that stands for recognize, allow or acknowledge, investigate, and nurture. And the nurture is a really big piece. So it's first, recognizing this feeling that you have, allowing those feelings to be there without beating them up. And as you do that, you can drop down the layers of those feelings sometimes. So like I thought I had this big blame energy for my dad. And as I allowed that blame energy to exist and investigated a little bit more in my body, it became clear that that was really covering up this fear that I would never find a place in the world that I belonged. Mm-hmm. And which is a big thing to go through by yourself,
That's big.
Yeah, it was very big. But the last step, nurture, has you meet yourself and care for yourself and send yourself this love and really sit with that and hold it and provide you with support, which is really huge and important. And also at that time, I was attending, actually, Tara Brach does these weekly talks on Zoom. And afterwards, they have this discussion group that I believe it's still going. People can join it for free from all over the world. And so you'd connect with a group of other people and be able to, at least during that one time a week, be able to share what you're feeling and what's coming up and just be in community with other people who care. And that was really helpful. So I never had to do it completely alone, even though I felt alone sometimes. And a lot of times it was, strangers on the internet who I was together with, but there'd at least be some spaces I was coming into every week to find a sense of community.
I think that's so important to, like, as you're going through, like, because I love that method. First, let's go back. I love that method. I think it's, the thing that I love most about it is the nurture at the end. Cause, as I've told this story a few times about how I had this epiphany of, for years, I was like, that voice, I'd tell her, to shut up, go away. As then one day I was like, who responds well to that? Like, I'm essentially like, who responds well to violence in their minds? And I thought to myself, I'm going to try something different next time they jump up in my face. And I tried the nurturing, where it was like, well, no, investigating. That's what I did. Because I remember asking myself, what is wrong? What is going on? How can I help you? Right. And it was more like curious and like, I want to learn a little bit more. And that started the journey of me getting to know my inner self. And you said something about like looking at it, but like there was something about without, you didn't use this word, but it was without judgment, right? Sitting in that feeling without judgment. When you are working with your clients, because that's a big one. It's so hard to sit with yourself if you're judging yourself for feeling bad. God, you're so stupid, that kind of thing. How do you navigate that with your clients? What do you recommend that they do, or practices that you suggest to help them get comfortable with sitting with the feeling without judging themselves by it?
I think that it's practice, it just takes practice. And I think that a regular meditation practice really helps us to do that when we understand typical, like watching the breath or body scan meditation is to develop awareness. And with it, I believe this sense of non-judgment, instead of, a lot of people think the point of meditation is to make your mind go blank. So then they're constantly judging themselves
we're not being blank.
Right. And, I went through that for a while. Like it took me a long time to figure that one out, but a lot of it is a practice of noticing what's going on, noticing when we're judging ourselves, and then forgiving ourselves even for judging ourselves. But, and so much of this, I think it's so helpful. Like when I started seeing massive growth in myself was when I was working with someone else, you know, when I had this supportive space and someone who could point these things out to me on a regular basis. And that's a lot of what the coaching relationship, at least that I provide, is helping these people nurture themselves and see themselves in a kind way, and not just leave them off alone to like keep apologizing to themselves over and over, but to provide this safe space where they can get affirmation for the work that they're doing and be reminded that they are a good, caring person, even if sometimes they say mean things to themselves.
You mentioned that you said that like you found your biggest growth when you were with somebody, when you were working with somebody. That's like that is so true. Like I want to that I feel like that's super important because a lot of the people that I've known in my life who are very smart people who, when they are dealing with issues, they feel like they have to do it on their own. They won't see a therapist, they won't see a coach, they won't find a mentor, they won't like, it's like I have to do it by myself. And I struggle with that a little bit. Like I don't struggle with that like myself not finding people, but I struggle with what to say because I sometimes I know that I can get frustrated, you know. So I'm curious to know, like, if somebody is out there and they're like, yeah, no, I can do this by myself. Can you tell me a little bit about, or share a little bit about drawbacks of trying to do this by yourself versus getting a therapist, getting a life coach, which by the way, guys, everybody listening, we know this, but therapy and life coaches aren't the same. So have a therapist, have a life coach. Like I have both. What would you say to somebody who feels like, you know, oh, I want to do this by myself?
Someone else can snap you out of your shit so much faster than you can do it yourself.
Well said.
And see it, you know, like it's just so funny now. My sister is not at all life coachy or anything, but now like she recognizes my shit so fast. Like the other day I'm having a conversation with her and she's like, you're doing that thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing that thing. Okay, cool. Then I'm like, okay again, you know, because she was able to see it. And other people are able to give us different perspectives too. Like we're in our own heads 24 hours a day, like 7 days a week, you know, like we're inundated by this one perspective. So just having someone else who can sometimes say like, is that really what's going on? Or like even call you out. Sometimes I'll get called out. Like, is that true? Like, it doesn't sound like you mean that. Like, okay, good point. Or like, wow, like that's not really a very kind thing to say to yourself, you know, like, but they're normal to us. We're used to beating ourselves up. We've been doing it for so long. So just having someone else to help snap us out of that is everything.
That is so true. You know, I found that my wife is really good at like noticing my patterns that I may not notice. Cause like I'll say, oh, this is this. And then she'll be like, you know, you've said that you had a headache for 4 days. Like, have you changed your medication? Have you done? And like, I don't notice it. I mean, like, I noticed that I've had a headache for 5 days, right? But it doesn't occur to me to stop and be like, what does this mean? You know, where did this come? Whereas she just sees it and she's like, hey. But the other thing, like you said about snapping out of your shit, is that like, you know, I know I can become very petulant. Like I'm such a petulant adolescent. Sometimes it's ridiculous. Like I like recently it's been all about journaling. I resisted it for so long. And, you know, everyone like the spirits and my therapist and every coach I work with was like, you've reached the point where at this point you got to journal. So either you journal or, you know, they're all just like, you either journal or you're going to be stuck here. So pick your poison. I literally sat there for like 2 weeks and my sister was like, you are being such a brat right now. She's like, you know, why are you not doing this? She's like, just because. And I was like, okay, you know what? I just need to, like you said earlier, practice. So I started by journaling like literally one line a day, and every day it was the same thing. It's like, why am I fucking doing this? And then by like the sixth day, I was like, all right, because I had to do 15 minutes. By the sixth day, I started to like, you know what, I'll draw something. And now I'm journaling like every day. But it took me a while to like, somebody had to like call me out on my bullshit. And it's important because I think you're right. We can bullshit ourselves like nobody's business.
Yeah, I love that. So like, let's say someone can't afford a therapist or a life coach and they like don't qualify for free therapy or whatever. Even just having someone that we check in with on a regular basis who's also on a growth journey or who desires to support us in that way. As long as we find the right person, right? We need someone who's nurturing and caring and wants us to do better. We don't want to do this with someone who's like just going to constantly be complaining and seeing the world in a dark way. But chances are we all could find someone, even if it's in an online group, like that Tara Brock one that I was talking about, who you can connect with on a regular basis. And it doesn't have to be a paid thing necessarily.
Absolutely. You actually reminded me, my friend, one of my friends, she found that traditional therapy wasn't working for her at all. And so this wasn't a money thing as much as it was like, this is just not working for me. And she ended up finding Patreon online because a lot of therapists are finding that the therapy practices are just driving, like just the insurance and dealing with all that is becoming awful. So a lot of them are leaving and starting their own groups like this, almost like a, therapy group, but it's not like traditional therapy, but it gives you that kind of support. And I just want to reiterate what you said about having these groups online. You found some people on Meetup, and I have some powerful relationships with people I've never met in person. And one of my friends, her entire relationship network is online. Like she doesn't see anybody like IRL. It's just everybody's online. But like you said, they have that support that they need, which is so critical. Now, as part of your practice, do you have a group thing that you do or a group class that you do, or do you do mostly one-on-one?
I do one-on-one right now.
And do you find that do you work with people at like a long, over a longer period of time? So like if somebody wanted to work with you, do you do like one sessions or do you do like, packages? Cause like, for some, we know like it's hard to see progress after just one session, right? So I usually, I typically wouldn't see somebody for only one session, but like I've recently started doing that where I'm like, okay, you have a quick problem. You want to just talk about something. We'll come in here. If it turns out you need more, we'll do more. But like, this will be so how do you tend to like to work with people like when somebody is coming to you struggling?
I generally work with people for 3 months at a time, meeting for 45 minutes to an hour every week and supporting them in between like by email. But I found in the beginning, I was trying to offer all sorts of different ways of working with people, like these one-off sessions. And it was so frustrating for me because we'd make a lot of progress in one session and they'd be so excited. And then they'd go off and things would be better, a little bit better. But then when they came back again, because they needed another session, it'd be almost like we weren't starting quite at square one, but we were starting at like square 1 1/8, when it's like having someone that you're checking in with consistently and regularly makes such a huge difference. And that's where you really get the growth. So occasionally I'll do a one-off session with someone for special cases or like a friend or family or whatever. But generally that's not how I try to work with people because I want them their whole lives to change. Like I call what I do transformational life coaching. I don't want it to just be like feel good life coaching. I want to help you change your whole life and create this life that you are going to absolutely love to live every single day. And that takes more than one session.
I love this. And I ask all the life coaches and any coach that's on here this question because I think that for so many of us, all of us, we want those quick results. And like the more people I can have say the language that it's like there is you see the benefits from consistent application over time. Like it's not like you said, a one thing and now I'm feeling better, because like you're helping people figure out like what they really want. You're helping them figure out like things like big life questions, and these are not questions that get answered like, all right, you got 30 minutes, let's do this. So a question for you about that, actually, you had a blog post about this, it's super great, where you were talking about running away from things versus running towards something. And that actually is another thing that I think I find myself falling into that trap all the time. Like I recognize it and bring myself out, but man, it's an insidious trap. So I would love to like hear a little bit more about how do you approach that? Because so many people are like, I hate this job. I have to leave it. Right. Or they're coming from a place of negativity, trying to run away from something versus there's something that I want. How do you advise or work with people, or how do you suggest people start with reframing that?
The first step is to notice that you are trying to run away from something or leave something behind. If it's something already going on in our lives, that's going to happen. I do that too a lot, on accident. Just that happened recently with my apartment. I was like, I have to change it. I can't live here anymore like this. And so my body is feeling tense. It just doesn't feel good. So there's tons of indicators that can help us notice that that's what's going on. Or maybe it's talking to a friend or something who points it out for us, or a coach, therapist, whatever. Then once we notice it, it's okay, Well, I think it actually helps to pause and first forgive ourselves for that. Like, oh, I did that thing that I always tell my clients not to do. Whoops.
Mhm.
What a silly human I am. Like, it's okay. I'm just a human being. Of course I make mistakes. And then to look for what you really want. So for example, with my apartment, it was like, okay, well, I want this comfortable, cozy space. That's what I want. It's not, how do I focus on just putting that image into my mind and allowing myself to feel what that felt like just through visualizing it feels a lot better. And then it helps me take reasonable steps to create that space.
In the space that you're already in, because now you're like really you're like, instead of like before you were like you thought it was the apartment that was the problem and you're like fuck this place, then you're like what do I really want? It's a cozy space, which is really weird because I actually went through something very similar, and that's why I actually finished painting my bedroom. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, I have control over that. I can actually make this space cozy now, right? I don't need to actually go do so. Is that like sort of what we're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So like with a job, a lot of times people will run away from a job when their problem might not have been the career in the first place. It might be the people that they work with or the way that they're working with those people. That this is like my favorite thing to support people with
Is
is
the job?
is liking people that they don't like more. Is like getting along with, like enjoying being around people that they don't like.
Interesting. Tell me more. Like, this is fascinating.
Because we
I'm
often,
terrified of people in general. So tell me how to be around people I don't like.
well, there's, it's again not an overnight thing, but
What? You can't tell me in the next 5 minutes?
I mean, I think like one of the very first things is it's building up our own self-love and appreciation of ourselves, right?
Hmm.
And as we start to do that, we're going to get less triggered by stuff that other people do. Also, getting better with our boundaries, because some cases, a lot of our issues with other people is that they mirror stuff that we have issues with. But I really have a huge problem with a lot of like spiritual teachers and coaches and stuff will say that that's always the case. And like, you know what? Some people just suck. Some people are just jerks.
Yeah.
And we might have a boss who's a jerk.
Hmm.
We can do all of our inner growth, but this boss is still going to be a jerk to us until we maybe shift our boundaries or
Yeah.
like set our boundaries and enforce them. So that can be hugely impactful. Also, though, beginning to see that boss differently, which we can cultivate through loving kindness, meditation, and different practices, can really help the way that we interact with them, which can improve our interactions with them too.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. So you mentioned boundaries, and that was something I actually want to come back to that because I think that is like so important. In fact, it's one of my things that I have a hard on for like constantly because I feel like so many of the frustrations in our lives are a result of not setting appropriate boundaries. What do you think about like, do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a ton of them are from not setting appropriate boundaries and not knowing ourselves well enough to know what boundaries we should set.
Love that. Oh my goodness. And it's so true. Or what are like what and taking it a little one step further, it's like not even not knowing ourselves well enough, but also the idea that like there are society has set it up so that setting boundaries, like the way that people respond to setting boundaries makes you feel like it's a bad thing. So you set a boundary. And I think one of the actually the one of the biggest challenges I think with boundaries is that people when they set boundaries, they set them and expect other people to respect them. And my thought on this is that no, nobody's ever going to respect your boundaries. It's your responsibility to maintain your boundaries. I mean, that's the other area is like a lot of times we'll set the boundaries. So like now you've taught them how to set the boundary, and somebody comes and pushes up against it, and they're like, well, they're not listening to my boundary. And it's like, well, of course they're not going to listen to your boundary. Now how do you like, so especially with a boss situation, this one is like, because like you're talking about setting boundaries with a boss. So let's say that someone has a boss who is, who tends to be overbearing, difficult to work with, and someone, and like they're really struggling under this person. Do you, when you're working with them, because like you mentioned that one of the things you love is talking about how to get along with people you wouldn't get along with, but what is the point at which you would say, okay, this isn't about you getting along, like this is not a healthy place for you to be, you need to go? Like what kinds of things would you tell them to look out for?
I don't think it's completely true that people will never respect our boundaries. And there's a
Hmm.
certain point at which they should or they need to. And if they can't, then that might be when we have to say, okay, I've explained this, I've explained this
Right.
very clearly. This is what's important to me in my life. If you can't allow me to live my life the way I need to, then this relationship isn't going to work anymore. And that includes in a work situation. Now, I'm not saying that everyone can or should just say that one day and then, throw their papers on their desk and walk out and leave. But that might be the time when you have to start figuring out another solution for yourself so that you have a place that you can safely go. Or, I mean, if you're the subject of abuse or anything like that, if your differences or abilities are not being respected, then there just might be nothing that you can do in that situation. I think you were talking about that on a recent podcast that I listened to. We should be able to expect a workplace to provide for people of all abilities. But if they're not going to, that's, as the person who's being impacted, then you need to make that choice for yourself to leave.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily change the whole system around you.
Exactly. And that's sort of why, because like you mentioned earlier, how some there's many coaches out there who like have that expression. It was like, that everybody's mirroring it, and you just have to sort of work it out, and that your philosophy is different. And so that's why I wanted to sort of like dig a little bit deeper in that, in like the cases where it's like you said some people are just jerks, right? And it's like, okay, well, these are the situations in which that may be the case, is where you need to go looking elsewhere, because it's not a healthy environment, like you said, like in workplace abuse situations especially, and that's so insidious. Like I could do a whole conversation about that one. And you were talking about the people who are not able to get the accommodations that they need, so I want to actually finish with this question. So my most recent podcast that I think just came out maybe today or yesterday is while we're recording this, it was about the things that are different about us being our superpower, like the things that make us special. But for so many of us, like, ADHD, for example, my whole life I've had ADHD. I had no idea that so many of the issues that I face were because I have ADHD. So what I would love to hear from you, because you mentioned earlier that you have ADHD, how do you feel like how has ADHD helped you and made you like a better you? Because you're like, yeah, this is giving me a skill or a gift.
It's probably given me a skill or a gift, because since my mind is going in 100 directions at any one time, or especially since it was when I was younger, I didn't just get stuck thinking I had to be this one way, or maybe I thought I had to be, but I was still exploring all these different things at the same time because my mind demanded that of me, especially before I learned to meditate and control it. So I got to know all of these different sides of myself and incredible things about myself. And that allowed me to discover these different gifts. Like I can be an engineer and a very logical person, and I can also be an energy healer, and I can also like hiking and whatever, and I'd say that's one way. I would really love if I can have the opportunity to come back to that jerk thing that I said earlier.
Go back. Let's go back to it. Totally.
Okay, awesome. So I said that some people are just jerks, which is funny because I think that's the way people experience the world a lot. It also really is not the way that I think. So I think that everyone is good, that we all have this good person inside of us, and that by looking for that good person within others, and that really kind, caring kid within them, our lives will be so much better. So I don't think that it is necessarily helpful for us to say like, oh, my boss is just a jerk. Absolutely not. But there's still a point where if they're going to keep acting that way, yes, they may be a really wonderful, kind, caring kid on the inside, but we still shouldn't subject ourselves to having to put up with someone who's going to treat us the way that a jerk would all the time.
And it's interesting. I feel like you and I are similar, except you're like sometimes where I'm like, I feel like I said something and I want to come back to that. I have yet to express the courage where like usually I'll just let it go, and I'm so glad that you did, and I'm like, I'm going to do that next time too when I feel that way, because I like this exchange that we're about to have, because I feel like nobody's just one thing, right? We're all so many different facets, and like you said, it could be that like I saw a meme once where it said sometimes you're the toxic person, and that really resonated with me, because I know for sure that no matter how hard I try now, in the past, I was not always healthy. And so sometimes I was the toxic person, like just because I was very in a bad space. But I also know that just because of the way I am, I'm going to rub some people really the wrong way, and I'm going to make them really uncomfortable, and they're not going to want to be around me. And it doesn't make me a bad person or them bad people as much as it just makes it that we're not a good fit for each other, and like maybe other people are. So I feel like, you never really know what somebody's going through. Like somebody could actually just be dealing with a lot of shit and somebody could actually be acting like a jerk. But regardless of what, I feel like it behooves us to see them as multifaceted people. But I think that to your point, and I like that you said this, is that because a lot of people will try to find the good and they'll stay till the very bitter end. I like how you shared that, like, okay, you can accept that this person has the good, but that still doesn't mean that you have to sit and take the part of it that is like, because it's not good for you.
Absolutely. You really need to put yourself first, and that's going to enable you to show up for all the other people in your life. You don't want to be wasting all of that goodness and energy on your boss. Your family and your friends need that too. You know, that person at the grocery store might need that smile from you that you might not be able to give them if you're muscling through this relationship that's not a good fit for you.
Especially if by removing that, you suddenly have so much more energy in the rest of your life, right? Because like it's not sucking it all out. So now like your overall energy is increased. So like it's a net positive for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Our energy is not limitless.
True.
As much as I wish it was.
Oh my God, I wish like it was. And now as I'm getting older and like life is changing, it's like, man, I feel like I have very pocketed times of energy that I have to like really focus on and be like, all right, this is where it's all coming from right now. Bara, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been awesome talking to you and hearing your perspective and sharing it with my friends. I was wondering, because I know that there are people who are going to want to follow up and read the article. Just for everyone to know, I am going to post all of the links to their blog, the links to your website, the whole nine. But is there a place that you would want them to go if they're looking for you?
Absolutely. Thank you. My website, Baraco, BARACO.org, has all those blogs. And I also am pretty active on Instagram, and I really love interacting with people in there in my DMs and comments and stuff. That's Baraco Bara, BARACO
Fabulous. And we will include links to all of these in the show notes so that you can access them at manessa.com. Thank you again so much.